Hello, everybody. This is your host, Masood Ahmed Al Allah's Narrative. And today we are joined with Trey Bishop and we are talking about Abraham's origins. Welcome, Trey Bishop.
Well, thank you for having me.
Would you like to just briefly talk about yourself a little bit and your interest in these sort of topics?
Uh, well, so I grew up in the Baptist tradition and were familiar with these stories, but as I got older, um, I read other traditions, which have, I suppose, initially been oral. Some of them are considered apocryphal traditions and things like that. I think it's an interesting, when you start talking about ancestors, everybody down the family line, different splits in the family have different points of view about how things happened, and it's an interesting topic.
Hmm. Can you up a little bit of your volume, please, if you can? Just on the
How's that?
phone. Just on the. Yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Does that help any? Maybe that's
Uh,
just the
on,
headset.
on your phone, can you just put up the volume on the phone, please? So do you still go to church and stuff like that?
Oh no, not in very long time.
Mm. But I think it's fine now. Do you consider yourself? I mean, I did speak to you previously, but you consider yourself as a believer, right?
Give me 1 second. Just go my headset. Back with you now.
Y- Yeah,
Okay,
it's okay. Yeah, it's better. It's better, I suppose.
okay. Um, no. I was booted out probably over 30 years ago. I got heretic.
Okay.
I put, oh, there we go. I'm back on the screen with you. I'm sorry, I was trying to mess with the settings and fix my headset.
Yeah.
Um, uh, you know, I things that the church was teaching uh, just didn't click with me. So,
Right. It does happen to a lot of people, though.
um, I really like the things that Gospel Jesus says, but
Hmm.
I think the stories that Paul tells don't. It's not that I'm not disagreeing with them. Uh,
Mm.
I just don't think that. Uh, I think it ends up distorting what Jesus was
Right.
trying.
Okay.
Um, so I like the things that Gospel Jesus was teaching. The
Yeah.
church did agree with me, and so yeah, I'm not really with that anymore.
Okay. That makes sense. What do you, I mean? I did look into the m- except for one, which was not a secure link. I did look into all of the other links you provided me, and those are interesting bits about Abraham. So, what do you think about what do you think you know about Abraham's origins? Can you share those?
Well, I think one thing, first of all, that you have to look at is what he's called. He's called Abraham, and it has a meaning. It's a title, and it's a father of nations. And the general gist of the idea is that many nations come from this guy and can claim him. And so, as far as the details of his life go, I'm not sure that he was a real person. It doesn't matter to me if he was a real person or not. It doesn't make a difference. We can look back at this kind of
Mm.
story and we can learn some lessons from it. And if we identify with that story,
Mm.
we can find common ground together as brothers, descending from this character. Even if I don't have it, maybe I come from a Neanderthal. I don't know, uh, but uh, Okay, so the story and this story, looking at it from your Hindu family background or ancestors, whatever, it is a gradual. It tells the story of a gradual realization from the many powers of the universe, the many gods,
Hmm.
to the idea that this is really just one power.
Hmm.
So it's a evolution. It's a it's a story of spiritual evolution, and it
In
and
in
and
case in case of Abraham, yes, in that civilization. Well, before Abraham, there's a very big footprint of prophets across all the nations, and that's what we get told in the Quran. And the progenitor, um, Noah, Noah, Noah was a decisive judgment on the people of that time who did invent blasphemy in a way. So Noah kept preaching to them about one God because this God reached out when human beings drifted from the natural ways. So what we see is God is reaching out to people when people are drifting away from their natural instincts. So once that happens, God sends prophets and he communicates. And Sumer itself, as a civilization, as a nation, got established much later after the Noah's deluge. So Abraham comes a man in Samaria or in that region. So at that time, between Noah and Abraham, according to the Quran, there's easily several millennium right there. Okay, but we don't get to grapple that sort of timeline when we read the
the
Bible
Quran
and
give you
trace
a
the
timeline?
trace the genealogy. Sorry.
Does the Quran give you a timeline for in years from Noah
it
to Abraham?
it does in a very subtle way. It does in a very subtle way. Excuse me, just excuse me, bear with me. My kids are making a lot of noise. You can hear them, I suppose. Ahmed, can you please, Mariam, can you please go to the different room? Please go. So the Quran does that in a very subtle way. What the Quran does is it says, after Noah, we had this nation, this civilization, this particular civilization, this particular civilization. And it goes on tracing these civilizations whom God communicated until it says, after this, we got Abraham and we sent Moses to Egypt. So, but it's very contradictory in nature. I will soon put out a video in this regard, but it is very contradictory to the way Bible brings up the genealogical tree, the tree of genealogy. So it's very different in a way, the way the Quran does it. So it gives you a very clear idea of it's not the same timeline, it's a different timeline, it's a different epoch. Obviously, Noah fought against blasphemy, and there was this flood and deluge, destroying all the idol worshippers. But if you read the book of Jasher, I mean, just reading that, Jasher tells you that Abraham actually lived with Noah and his son Shem, and he learned about the Lord when he was 3 with Noah. And at the same time, his father was manufacturing idols. So if you put together all the things in the perspective, you will get the idea of how can this be, because Noah just destroyed all the idol worshippers. You know what I mean? So you get to conclude there is something missing there. And that's why probably the early Bible, people who put the Bible together, canonized it, they had difficulty with books like the accounts of Jasher and stuff like that. So I can see why they would have had difficulties to be able to do that. And nonetheless, the book of Jubilees, though, it's a very, I felt it's a good account. If you were to compare that to the Bible, because the Bible entirely omits the origins of Abraham. It just doesn't talk about origins of Abraham. It just completely cuts it out. So in that regard, the Book of Jubilees have something to contribute to the Bible. I think the scribes went crazy because they Israelites lived in Egypt for a long period, and that was long enough for them to forget about everything. So when they came back to the Holy Land, people who lived there, they knew about Abraham, and they were talking about Abraham. All of these stories were very popular, and Israelite scribes, when they came back, they had the difficulty to assimilate what they heard about Abraham, and in that process, they cut most of the Abraham's origins out of the Bible. So that's what I think. Okay, that's what I think. What has happened with the scribes making their own decisions about what elements to start off with Abraham. Nonetheless, I mean, it was interesting for me to read from the Book of Jubilees and even Jasher, for example. But Jasher gets too, um, um, for me, too kiddish or childish. Like it's not making decisive judgments about a chronology and succeeding timelines and stuff like that. You know, basically with the deluge coming to punish idol worshippers, and again you see idol worship happening in when Noah is alive. So there's contradicting accounts there. So yeah, what do you think about it?
Um, well, first of all, I think you need to keep in mind the book of Yashar is it's referred to twice in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Tanakh, but scholars don't believe the link that I sent you, the book that I sent you, which is it's an amazing book. They don't they don't believe that this is actually the ancient book that is being referred to for several reasons. But the reason that I sent it to you is that it probably was written sometime between the 9th and 16th century, the Common Era, according to Jewish tradition of the um, Spanish Jews, which
Mm,
it was probably written somewhere in Spain or southern Italy.
mm,
However, it probably preserved some of the oral traditions in the midrash. That's in fact what it's called as the Jewish midrash
mm,
that were being passed around. Um, so, like I said, if you have if you've ever gone to a family reunion where you have second cousins or something distant and you talk about the great grandparents, you're going to find out you have slightly different stories than they have,
absolutely.
or
Absolutely.
especially like with your parents and their brothers or sisters. They're like, nah, they were like so and so, and
Yeah,
they
yeah, yeah,
they can say things about each other, and you're like, I don't know where the truth really lies. There's two kind
yeah,
of different
absolutely.
same stories. So
Yeah, it does happen. That's probably how it entailed in ancient Israel. So
So I think that's what was going on, and these people knew, regardless of the
mm,
fact that if there was a particular person that whose mama actually named him Abraham,
mhm,
they know that they are a part of the same family, traced back to this source with this particular tradition, and these are the kind of stories that they're sharing. And the
mm,
stories they've given us about him, in particular, the one that I brought
mm,
to your attention that I really wanted to talk about was the idol.
mm,
Um, these are just great stories, and why they didn't make the cut for Genesis, I don't know. But
mm,
um, nevertheless, they found their way into the Quran, um,
mm,
and now the Muslim people can
mm.
appreciate the value of that story. So
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely interesting for me to read about it. I was of the opinion that the Bible completely misses it, and it's found only in the Quran. That was my opinion, initial opinion, and that's how I write about it in my book, Ancient Astronomy. When I talk about Abraham as being the peer astronomer, I talk about it, and I have a passing comment where I'm making a comment saying the Bible completely misses it, and the Quran captures it. At that point in time, I did not know about these other books that would also capture the story. but in a different way, of course. But the Quran gets down to very sort of detail, and some of the stories in the book of Yashur. I just read Yashur, and the story of um, the king confronting Abraham, Nimrod confronting Abraham, is very. I mean, it's not the way the Quran describes it. The Quran has a very different argument about the whole confrontation with the king. So yeah, the Quran makes or gives meanings that are relatable to faith of a person directly. Like you can see into the story how there is an argument about faith, belief versus disbelief, a believer versus a disbeliever, and what were the reasons that each other, they were giving to each other, and how did the argument unfold. So that sort of kind of misses in the book of Yashur, if I want to make that comment, but it's very clearly captured in the Quran, and it gives you the whole purpose of Abraham and how Abraham rose in the good ranks of God and why God chose him for his intellectual um, deducing the Creator. So it's fascinating how Abraham grew up in the background of polytheism, watching his father manufacture those idols, and he just reasoned, how does my dad do this? My dad, he makes it, and the next day he's worshiping it, and all of the other people in the town are doing the same thing, and I see that they are made, so surely they can't be our creator because we are creating them. So he goes out and he basically searches for the creator. He's like, but he's so used to looking at the idols because that's how he grew up, looking at the idols as gods all the time. So he searches for God to see him with his sight. So he locks up on the uh, very beautiful appearing object in the night sky, which is Venus. Back in those days, you could actually see Venus phase out, like unlike today. So if you would clearly observe Venus, it would phase like it would wane and wax just like the moon, but a little bit to a lesser magnitude. So he just locked his gazes on Venus and he meditated that to be God watching over the whole world. But as he growing as he grows up, observing the objects in the celestial space, he realizes that this Venus has a particular pattern of appearing on in the night sky and then disappearing. So he realizes, oh, this is not a creator of ours, but this is an object created by the creator and has times of appearance and disappearance. It's phasing and phasing out. So then he
It's
then
power,
he
Edwin.
yeah, it's then he looks at the moon, the glorious moon, in the night sky, and he observes the moon phasing and doing the same pattern. It's waxing and it's waning and it disappears and it appears again. He's like, no, these objects in the celestial space should be controlled. And then he looks at the sun, the glorious sun, which is more powerful. It shines up the entire earth. He's like, wow, at least this can be the creator, because he's so much used to seeing the creator all the while. So he is slowly growing out of the necessity to be looking at the creator to believe. So he's slowly graduating out, and he looks at the sun and he's like, no, even this is controlled because it's rising and setting, it's rising, it does that all year, and this can't be God either. And finally he has an after making sense of the astronomical bodies and how they're controlled in the sky, he grapples them. He studies. I mean, he's acquiring knowledge about their their rising, their setting in the celestial space, and which one is further away, which one is closer. He can make sense of how moon phases out so much in detail, in greater detail than the Venus does. So he's making sense of their distances, and then the sun every day. His once he has made a good sense of how astronomically they are functioning as bodies in celestial space, he then has an argument with his people. He says, "What do you worship? I mean, what do you worship?" So there's a detailed argument with them, and then he he tells them. I mean, he looks at the stars and he says, I mean, what do you want to worship?" So, and then he says, I'm gonna play a trick on you." So once the people have left their guard of the temple, the Quran says Abraham goes in and he demolishes those idols except for the big one. Okay, so that people can report to him. They can get back to him. So soon the word is out. When the temple guards are back, they find
I
out.
I'm gonna stop you for just 1 second. I like to think when I read this story that he was a rebellious teenager at this point, and
Hmm,
he was the guy with the smirk on his face. The town people, they knew when something went down, he might have had a hand in it. That's
hmm.
what I think is the story when he smashes the idol. Go ahead,
Yeah,
go ahead.
absolutely. Absolutely. So when they find their steps back to the temple, they find the destruction of the temple and the idols. So there's a clamor. Who did it? Who could have done this possibly? So who's the guy? Can we find out? And stuff like that. So people do report to the king. We know of a person, a young person, who was talking against our gods. So he is the likely candidate who would have done it. So they identify him as Abraham. Like at least in the Quran, his name remains the same. Like in the Bible, we see Abram becomes Abraham later on. God calls him Abraham, but in the Quran, it's just Abraham. So people identify him as Abraham. So the king says, "Okay, summon him." So they go and get Abraham, summon him into the king's court, and the king goes like, "What do you worship?" And Abraham goes, "I worship the God who gives life and death." A very simple definition. So Abraham comes along and gives a very simple definition. He says to him, "I worship someone who gives life and death." Very simplistic. So the king goes, "I can do that as well." So I mean, he gets prisoners out, and the one who's about to be freed, he puts him to death, and the one about to be on the death sentence is freed. So that's the demonstration of um, how he can give death as well. The king.
Doesn't that count in
No,
the Quran?
this bit is not in the Quran. This bit is the interpretation. This bit,
Oh, okay.
the freeing of the prisoners is not in the Quran, but yeah, what Abraham does it is
Is
he
that
gives
called
him
falsify?
another. What Abraham how Abraham responds to it is like when the king says to him, "I can give life and death." So Abraham tells him, can you bring the sun from the west, because my Lord does it from the east? That's the argument Abraham gives to the king. Okay. So the king then is confounded. So he and then the argument is turns out to be bitter, and they decide. I mean, just before that, I missed to tell you this bit, and Abraham says, "Look, you want to ask me who did it, who destroyed the idols? Why don't you ask this big guy, the big idol of yours? Why don't you ask him?" And they are bewildered, and they
Why was he so confident to mock the big idol? Why didn't he think that God was going to get even with them?
sorry, what did he say?
That big idol. Why didn't he think? Why did he think it was okay to mock that God? And didn't he think that that big God was going to get even with him for passing up his buddies and
Like
blaming it on him?
literally, Abraham had no fear. It so happens that when people
But
are
he had no
worshiping
fear
this.
for a reason. There was a reason for it.
Absolutely, because of his realization of who God is, who the real God is, who the true God is. So they're like, Abraham, these idols do not talk. And he catches on that point, and he says, "Oh, misery for you!
You
How
guys know they
how?"
don't talk too. You guys know they don't talk.
That's right. So he goes full on them, and he says, "Oh, misery!" And you worship such objects that don't even help themselves. So and that's the beginning of Abraham's rise in the good books of God. And God decides, from the darkness of idol worship in the entire earth, all the civilizations are involved in it. So from this darkness, Abraham rises as the friend of God who advocated God from this darkness. So he brought light. So God said, "Now I've got a unique plan. I'm going to be stopping what I was doing, like sending prophets to different civilizations. I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to choose you, give prophecy in your descendancy, and make you as a chosen nation so that you can bring light unto the whole world." So that's the beginning of Abraham and Abraham's dynasty in the books of God. So that's where God is acting in a political way. He's setting up his party on earth, his political party, with Abraham as a forerunner. And all of this reasoning that Abraham have had with respect to God, his faith is unshaken, even when he had to confront his king. So he was undeterred, and he rose in those ranks of intelligence and intellect and bravery and courage and all of that charisma he had to advocate about God. So God chooses him. You are going to be my friend, and prophecy is now going to be limited in your bloodline, and your children are going to be my nation who will advocate about me to the whole world. And that's exactly what has happened. If you see today, the whole world has found faith in the God of Abraham, the whole Christian world, half of the world. The other half of the world, I mean, you can divide the world in three parts. One is Christian, one is Muslim, and the other is, for example, China. For example, like bulk of the population in China and India, for example, who have remained polytheists. And sort of make those divisions and see
There's a
how
lot of
people
people in
have
China.
how people have been united. And no doubt China has Christian populations and Muslim populations, no doubt about that. India has probably great many Muslims than the whole Middle East put together. But still, if you were to go by population, India has significant polytheistic population, and China has significant population that does not have faith in the God of Abraham. So if
We
you
have
were to
to talk
look at,
about. We have to talk about the India eventually. Not today. Someday we have to talk about the. We have to talk about Hinduism. That would be
yeah,
fun.
yeah. So that way, God has done great things to Abraham and fulfilled his promises made to Abraham. And this in itself is uh, an evidence of a higher magnitude. It's like a mountain that you can't shake. You know what I mean? This evidence, what God has done with Abraham, is so big that no evil can touch it. But it's how people
There's
don't look at it in
potential
this way.
is
It's
perhaps
very
the word.
amazing.
There's a lot of potential. There is a
Mm,
potential to draw people together. Like I said,
mm,
as a when and as a very specific example, I mean in Israel Palestine, when the people who are there realize that no matter how distantly they are related,
mm,
um, they can find some common ground and stop fighting over an inheritance. Um,
absolutely.
and more broadly, and I think if that happens there, I think more broadly the people of Earth
Mm,
can take that same attitude, that brotherly attitude, and stop fighting over an inheritance.
mm. Look, um, I would like to tell you about Jeremiah, the example that he gave. Jeremiah says to I mean, the Lord said to Jeremiah, get a good piece of cloth, nice material, and have an undergarment stitched for yourself, and then go out to a riverside and bury that under the ground. And after some time, go back and fetch it and wear it. What happens is, by the time when it's hid under the ground, it's degrading and things it's torn and it's partly ripped. So what happens is when you wear that undergarment, your shame is shown, right? So God says, "You, my nation, wear like that undergarment of that fine silk that protected my shame." That kind of a symbology. But what you have done is abominable. You have become like the torn underwear where nobody respects the man wearing it anymore because the shame is shown. You know what I mean? That's sort of a symbology. So God says, I chose you for a purpose. And the purpose was you be good standard bearers of my party, so that by your good works and the fruits that you produce, all the other nations can come and taste the sweet fruit and know your God, your Lord. But you haven't done that. All you have produced is sour grapes, and no one want to eat those. And for that reason, I'm casting my judgment upon you. And that's the time, Babylonian captivity. So that's when it is happening. So God is so mad at the nation. It's like, I chose you for a purpose, but you have not stood the promises. You have broken my covenant of peace and justice and fairness and compassion, basically of the truth, seeking the truth, treating humanity with kindness and compassion. You haven't done it. So God became really, really mad at them. And the same times we are looking at the same times today. God is mad. He's like going, he's like, I've chose you for a purpose, but you're not reflecting that purpose. You're not reflecting that
It says
covenant.
to be a light unto the nation, a light unto the nation. And I
Absolutely.
think if you did a worldwide survey of, if you ask people, who do you think is a light to the rest of the nation? Um, Maybe 30 or 40 years ago, people might have said America. Not anymore. But
Mm.
I don't think that they would say Israel. I don't think they would say
No,
that.
unfortunately, they wouldn't. And that's the thing, the kind of things that Israel is doing at this moment. I mean, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and America, if they see the purpose in the kingdom of God, the world will be transformed unlike anything before. Unlike. It's going to be a new world where the God of Lord of Abraham is found finds his glory. And what happens? Guess what happens? God is going to bless the entire world, and He's going to give these people dominion over the earth for an age to come. So for this to happen, people need to realize, you know, Israelites, when they found faith in God, you know what God did to them, to David, to Solomon. The kingdom that God can give people if they worship Him, There's nothing like it. And what God gave to Ishmael, like Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad and Ishmael, like the kingdom for such a long duration over the Holy Lands. This is what God can do another time. What God gave to the Turks, for example, to the Turks when they believed. So this is what God can do again if people believed in Him and did His will and collaborated, cooperated, found peace between themselves. I mean, why do like Jews have to continue to disagree? Um, but because it's been 2,000 years, they have had no prophet. If they would like to continue to disbelieve in Christ and disbelieve in Muhammad, it's already been 2,000 years. They have not seen a prophet. What are they even doing? I mean, shouldn't they seriously think about it and you know given their but move away from their prejudice against Christ and Muhammad? It'll be a wonderful thing if they did, but
There's
two
a lot
thousand
of
years is such a long time to be
a lot
waiting
of
for a
hate and
prophet to
anger.
come.
There's a
Hmm?
lot of hate and anger towards the Christian population and even the Muslim population among the Jews. And you know, I can see why they're angry. A lot of I have ancestors who were Jews
Mm,
and they left and became, when, especially in America, they just became Christians.
mm,
Um, but they're upset about that. And now, if you look in Israel, they're throwing massive tantrums about that. They'll spit on Christian nuns and priests in the street over there, or people,
mm.
Christian people from the West coming to to see where all of this, Jesus was crucified and this and that.
Right.
Um, uh, they're they're angry, but
Mm,
like I said about, let's go back to Abraham and the disagreement that Muslim people have, most Muslim people with the Christian and Jewish population is over which was the son that was supposed to be sacrificed. Was it Ishmael or was it Isaac?
mm.
And who does the promise flow through? Is it Ishmael or Isaac? And if if you keep following the story um, from Isaac, and Isaac has two sons, and these two guys are fighting over a birthright, and
Yeah.
then they they continue to fight over who is the rightful heir or who is, um, and maybe the oldest brother just wants the Jew. He just wants his recognition. He wants his rightful place or what have you. Uh,
Mm.
I don't, a lot of feelings tied up in that.
Yeah, I mean, if any integration or collaboration is going to happen, the experts from all of these sort of communities have to come along and devise uh, statements of how the collaboration is going to take place. And without going into specifics, communities can agree sacrifice of Abraham is paramount, regardless of who it is. So we can have a common agreement to proceed, And I think if people did this, it'll benefit them greatly in the long run. And it will pave the way for people's unification. And people have the freedom to choose beliefs. They can, they deserve it, and we should give it to them. And rather than controlling people into select schools of thought or select methodologies, we have to basically liberate them and tell them you are free to have any beliefs. We all belong to Abraham, so there's absolutely no problem. So given that freedom, people would explore the scriptures in greater depth, and they would formulate what is true accounts in as part of their future progression.
So
So I don't see.
let
Yeah,
me propose something to you.
yeah.
So we talked about Abraham and his watching the stars and his observation that these idols that his dad was making didn't have any power to. They were making the idols, and the idols couldn't defend themselves or
Right.
any other putties. So he deduced all of this on his own, and I think
Hmm.
that people are capable of this as well. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
so
I
uh,
100% agree with you.
in our private previous conversation, we talked about the what I think is a Muslim belief is that everyone is born Muslim. Everyone is born with uh, the the first knowledge is that of the Creator because that's all
Mm,
that we can know.
mm,
Um, so if you can know this and if you can deduce these things throughout your life by observing His creation,
mm,
I think that it stands to reason that we can, as individuals, weigh what we read and what is reported from others, whether they're called prophets or whether they're called holy scriptures or whatever the case
hmm.
may be. We can weigh these individually on an individual basis.
Yes.
Um, the objection that I find to this is people that want this or this particular writing to be the set in stone thing
Hmm.
is people will, and this happens in America quite a bit. People will beat each other over the head with their Bible and
Mm,
their interpretation of what this
mm,
means. So even if we said that rule 1, 2, 3 written in this scripture were correct, the interpretation, how we decide to interpret this and to
mm,
carry it out, or whatever the case may be, could be entirely different.
mm.
Um,
What I have to
yeah,
contribute here, I've got a statement to make here.
okay.
The problem that we have among Christians, Jewish people, and the Muslim people is we have something called as religious theologians or scholarships from theological colleges, and they have been going back to centuries in the tradition of these faiths, and these are the biggest problem for any natural progression into the future, because these are the ones who are purists, who assert their own methodology as being superior or saved or deserving salvation, and all others are condemned to hell. What governments need to do is get rid of these people and these schools of theology, and we have to make the books of God, like for example, the Bible and the Quran, as a curriculum taught in the schools, like by the government, you know. So all the kids, they're given the opportunity to learn about religion, about God in the schools critically, rather than going to their own churches or mosques and learning about it. So once you bring that into the school curriculum and you're handing over the responsibility to a next generation of children to make their own judgments about these texts, that will be the beginning we deserve. And that's the method we can take to change the course of the future, rather than being dependent on centuries old schools of theology that are seeped deep into tradition, which who do nothing but act divisively and further divide the society. So they are actually, these bodies are harmful to the nation, to the natural progression of a nation. So we are better off as societies to get rid of them and have the scriptures inculcated into the curriculums of the schools, where children, a new generation of children, are given the opportunity to critically read them and make up their own minds about it. So that's the way I propose. I don't know. I don't know your views about it. You're most welcome to share your views about it. What do you think?
In the United States, that would present a serious problem.
Mm,
The way that the First Amendment is interpreted by just the vast majority of people, the government could not and if we're talking about public schools, the government could not uh, introduce this type of, unless they did it in a very broad way and introduced just literally everything. We're talking about, the Bhagavad Gita and
Mhm.
the Tao Te Ching and everything. So there would be so much in
Absolutely.
school to introduce, and I don't have a problem with that. I would like for my children to be exposed to all of these things, but
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
way that I have handled it is to bypass the government altogether. And in in the United States, uh, we generally have broad allowances for homeschooling, and in some states like mine, I live in Oklahoma. Uh, our state has no regulation whatsoever of homeschooling. So if you decide to take your children out of public school, and if you were an Orthodox Jew and you only wanted to teach them Tanakh and Talmud and things like that, you could do that. You wouldn't have to teach
Mm,
them any mathematics or where babies come from, or
mm,
that the sun doesn't revolve around the earth or anything at all. You could
mm,
choose what you want to teach them.
mm,
And that has its drawbacks,
mm.
uh, but I think that using the force of government to introduce anything is probably not the best way. I think that good arguments win out. You don't have to force your way on someone if your argument is very good. If
Now,
you and I are in the
for
desert
for
together and
example,
water is a
for
big deal, but
example, for example, in Australia, the government's regulations are that schooling is mandatory. Okay, until certain age, schooling is mandatory. Even if people want to homeschool their kids, their children, there is a very strict regulation as how they have to be reporting to the government on how they are progressing. Giving imparting education to their children. So So this is what I mean. Not necessarily that government has to force the kids to learn something or to acquire some beliefs. That's not what I'm intending to say. The government obviously cannot force people to acquire beliefs. That's not my statement. What I'm saying is my proposal is children can be given knowledge about these profound uh, traditions of uh, world communities. I mean, this is our background. All of the world communities, like for example, America, Australia, and the Islamic world, the Jewish world, and the Hindu world, they have traditions. They 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 project their progression based on their traditions. So they value their culture, their traditions. So what I am proposing is the government should make it mandatory for new generation to learn about these things in a critical way in the schools, in the school curriculum, rather than the current arrangement where people, new generation people, continue to grow into divisiveness because they go to the respective churches, mosques, and temples and whatnot, and they are being divisive as they are growing up into being adult citizens, which is not in favor of the strength of a nation. This is a highly important aspect which we, in my opinion, are ignoring for the future strength and durability of a nation. So I'm a strong proponent of the idea that the government needs to step in and give the opportunity to the young fellows, to young generation, to new generation, to be able to study all of these scriptures critically and make up their own mind. So that, in my opinion, that will resolve or solve the problem of divisiveness in societies, which is a good force for the future of the nation. That's what I believe. I mean, if you want to critique that idea, go ahead.
well, again, I think that I think it just goes back to the idea of force, and I can't prove that this is the case, but
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and I already told you I don't like to use that term often, believe, but this is something that I believe, that um, a good argument or I mean, people can make good arguments for nonsensical things, so that's probably not the right way to say it. You shouldn't have to force people to. Okay, there's a comment. Somebody has been watching our thing here, and it says smoking is injurious to health. I don't think you wrote that, did you? Somebody was watching and noticed that I smoke and said smoking is injurious to health. So the government could force me to stop smoking. Obviously, I when I cough and I have, you know, I'd like to run somewhere and I'm short of breath. I already know this. Nobody has to force me to know that smoking is injurious to my health. The
Right.
government could do something about it. This goes right back to Abraham and the idol and
Mm.
the truth of that message, which is that in the end, truth wins out. These
Absolutely.
idols could not do anything for themselves.
Yeah.
And if Abraham's God that he trusted was real, then he
Mm.
could, in fact, do something for Abraham. And that's how the story is read. That's how they tell us, is that he was justified in his faith.
Mm.
So um, I think that is also the case with regard to um, force or using and that's what always boils down to when we talk about government. It does come
Mm.
down to force because if you don't do what they say, they will come with the police or they'll come with the court, court
Mhm.
order or whatever. And then if you tell the judge to screw off, the judge will send the police or the sheriff or whatever your
Yeah.
country has. And if you don't go kindly with them or do what they say, they will rough you up. And if you
Yeah.
rough them up in return, you might end up getting this might be a thing where you die. And I just don't. I think that there are better ways to
Mm.
achieve righteous purpose than
Okay.
brute force.
Mm.
Um, because if we are exerting our force to achieve this righteous purpose, it is like those idol worshippers who are using their force to teach Abraham a lesson because those
Mm.
idols couldn't do it for themselves. If our
Right.
ideas are not strong enough on their own, like those idols were not strong enough,
Mm.
those idols couldn't defend themselves and needed the force of the police or whatever to do their bidding, to throw
Right.
Abraham into fire.
Yeah.
Uh, that's that's just kind of how but I don't
So is
disagree
is is
with
is schooling
what
is
the
schooling in America compulsory?
Um, so every state is different, and we each have our own state constitutions, and each of them say something about education. Ours, in particular, says that we will provide public
Mm.
education for this
Mm.
period of time, and that children will either attend public education or go to a private school or will be homeschooled. So there will be at least a parent saying our kid
What
is
if
homeschooled.
what if there is a proposition of I don't school my kids? How
So
does the government treat it?
there is a movement in America
Mm.
called unschooling, where
Yeah. Okay.
children are not schooled in any
Right.
traditional sense whatsoever. But a lot of all of the kids that I've seen can read and write and operate,
Yeah.
computers and machinery, and they follow
Yeah.
their parents to work, and
Right.
they know how to interact with adults and things like this. So it's probably the unschooling movement is probably only 20 years old, and so it still
Mm.
remains to be seen how these children, now adults, will enter the workplace and
Okay.
society. They will
Mm. Mm. Mm.
own houses or if they'll end up in prison or what happens.
So, so you're okay with that idea? Is that what you mean, right?
With unschooling,
Yeah, you
yeah,
should be because the way that you're proposing
yeah,
things, so you should technically be okay with that idea. So you will be opposed to the idea that Australia has, for example, wherein it makes it mandatory to school children, and By the way, Australia has mandatory electoral process. You have to vote. You have to cast your
Have
ballot.
to
If you
vote.
don't, you have to. If you don't, then you get fined.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That.
So I'm I'm sure. So what are you getting at? It is like you believe in absolute freedom, um, and I kind of
I
appreciate
wouldn't
that
say
idea, right?
absolute at all. I wouldn't say absolute at all. I would say that in in cases of government interference, the government needs to be able to prove harm to someone. There needs to be able to
Okay,
they need to be able to
then
demonstrate harm.
I've got a question to you.
Mhm.
Like in the traditions that we are talking about, the Islamic, Christian, and the Jewish tradition and the Hindu tradition, there is widespread sectism. There's cults, religion is broken into shreds, each to their own is a code of conduct, and each of those people who have become purists in their own way think about other branches of that religion as condemned to hell. So, this magnitude of divisiveness, don't you think it's harmful to the society? Is my question to you. Don't you think it presents greater harm? And that's why I'm proposing interference by the government.
Is there? I mean, obviously there's harm where there doesn't need to be, but uh, hmm,
Like back
yeah.
in those
So
days,
I did say
Protestants
yeah,
and
harm.
Catholics, they killed each other. Like today,
Yeah,
Shias and Sunnis kill each other. There's great
right,
harm.
right.
So that's where I'm saying the government need to interfere and give the opportunity for the young generation to critically study the scriptures for themselves without the influence of these theologic theology based tradition based theologies. So, without their interference, if the children, new generation, are given a turn, an opportunity to be critical of those scriptures, they will grow up and make up their own minds on the truths of what it is. And it'll be a blessing, in my opinion, if government interferes to do this. It'll be a blessing for the next generation. Not that the government should force anybody to have certain beliefs. I'm opposed to that sort of an idea. My proposition is only limited to providing the new generations with the opportunity so that they can be critical of the scriptures, um, and make up their own minds about what is truth.
Well, I don't disagree that I think that children should have this stuff available. Um, however, let me throw in this caveat that I think that we should, before we involve the government in any
Mhm.
type of anything like that, or any, just before we involve the government, we should make
Mm.
sure that we haven't exhausted all of our ability to take care of the problem first. And as an example, I watched a video today of, do you guys have Target in Australia? Do you know what Target is?
Yeah, the shopping mall, is that what you
Oh,
say?
yeah,
Target?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So,
we do.
an older gentleman with mental disabilities is doing the self checkout in Target, and he's trying to buy a bicycle. Yeah, obviously he's not a well-to-do guy. He's got crumbled dollar bills everywhere, and he's taking so long that the Target employees, instead of going to help him check out and figure out what he's doing, they call the police to get rid of him, and the police
Wow.
end up arresting him, but abusing him, physically
Wow.
abusing him in the process.
Right.
When and you can see in the video that there are bystanders watching what is happening, and you're saying to yourself, why isn't somebody stepping up, realizing that this old guy has mental disability, and
Right.
somebody just helping him check out, just being a nice
Right.
guy.
Yeah.
So I think that that's part of our problem, is
Mm.
that we very quickly reach to the government for a solution when
Right.
we are the answer to our problem.
Got it.
And
Mm.
goes to this conversation, which is
Mm.
you and I
Mm.
talking, and
Mm.
I noticed that some of the Christian apologists and Muslim apologists have had, they've done some online conversations recently, and it sounds like
Mm.
they're trying to be nice to each other and
Right.
figure some things out.
Mm.
But, I don't know how their viewership is going to feel about that, because
Mm.
it's it's much more interesting when there's heated battles and whatnot, rather than people figuring out, you right now. I think if we lived in the same neighborhood, you and I,
Yeah.
we were thinking about what kind of righteous thing could we do. You're a Muslim and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just a guy. But what kind of
Yeah.
thing could we do that we agree on together? And there's an old lady down the house, and the city's bugging her because her house needs to be painted and her yard's always a
Mm.
mess. You and I
Mm.
could get down there and take care of that.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter whether I believe Muhammad's a prophet or you
Mm.
believe Abraham this or that or the
Mm.
Torah. None of that matters. You and I both
Right.
know that this needs to be handled.
Absolutely. Mm.
So I think that is the when I watch Muslim apologists criticize Christians,
Mm.
that's what I want to tell them is that you
Mm.
guys are talking about all the wrong things. Jesus
Mm.
said to do this and this and this and this. If you
Mm.
want to criticize the Christians, criticize them for the fact that there's fatherless children in our communities that need direction,
Mm.
and they're too busy doing their own thing.
Mm.
There are widows out there that need
Yeah.
some assistance.
Yeah. Well, there is so much good that definitely can come out of good cooperation between the communities, especially the Abrahamic communities, the Jews, Christians, and the Muslims. Well, we hope
I
something
don't think
comes
you can
along.
find. Do you think you can find a Hindu that would disagree with what I just said there?
Definitely not. I mean, any good minded individual would not disagree with that. So, people know instinctively, they know good needs to be done. And the beliefs, the respective beliefs, don't hinder from endeavoring to do goodness. But that's part of one part. That's one aspect of our life. The as excuse me. The aspect that I was trying to bring attention to is like the religious disagreements have greater harm. We do understand general compassion in the society and the need for it, and the need for communities, different communities, to come together and work for it. It's absolutely good. We need to do that. But what is happening within religion is far more dangerous, because you have these different schools. For example, in America, you have these different church groups that vehemently hate each other. They don't tolerate each other. They condemn each other to hellfire. What about this? I mean, when are we going to address this situation? Because this is graduating to be a problem that will end up dividing a nation. We can't have this sort of divisiveness within our society. The fabric of the society is being challenged and ripped apart. This is what I'm trying to address. Not, I mean, obviously, we do understand that common goodness is something which is very fundamental to human beings, regardless of faith. And in the Abrahamic tradition, there's equal impetus in bringing about good in the society, just as much as there is in the Vedas, for example, because I'm familiar with the Vedas of the Hindu tradition, right? So all human beings, they understand the goodness, the common goodness, and the need to be working towards it. But at the same time, what we fail to understand, or often drape it with covers, beautiful covers, is the religious intolerance within religions, within Christianity, within Islam, within Judaism. So there's the religious intolerance, and between the religions, it's significantly more. Between Christians and Muslims, it's significantly more. Between Jews and Muslims, Jews and Christians, significantly more. I am particularly focused around this area, and I'm saying this this problem, which is like um, eating away the society, like the ants, like the white ants eat away the wood. It's just crippling societies from within. And talking about religion becomes highly difficult in the society. You go and people just say like, each to their own, mate. Let's not talk about it. Let's not fight because of that. You know what I mean? So this is one of the contributing reasons why people move out of religion. A lot of atheists, they told me, I mean, you have the same religion, same God, but you can't even agree on it. You keep cribbing about it, you keep fighting about it for ages. And this is why we say, they said to me, we say religion is a bad force. It divides societies. So I'm particularly focused on this area. I'm saying we have to move out of tradition. The theology that was taught, that's that has its base in centuries old tradition. We have to move out of this and give our children a new opportunity where they come and face all of these books, religious books, and face them, study them critically without the influence of their own traditions, and be able to make up their own minds about it. So this is my point. And I think my house is getting noisy now. If you would like, we can stop this here and
No, I
continue.
see somebody running around back there. Is that your little
And
boy?
yeah, that's my little fellow. So we can continue this next week if you would like. What do you say?
No, I. Who? What's his name? Can you say
So
his
say
name?
hello
Is
to
that
him.
okay?
Yeah.
Salam.
Say salam.
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah, all right. So
Do you know the story, the parable of the house built on sand and the house built on rock?
yeah, that's right.
So, there's the guy that built this house on sand, and when the storms came, they washed it away.
Mm,
And the guy who was wise, he built this house on, he, first of all, he cleared away the sand and got
right.
down to solid bedrock and
Yeah.
built this house on that. And I would compare that to religion and belief.
Mm,
I'm sorry,
mm,
not religion and belief. Religion and belief is the same thing. I'm sorry. I meant religion or belief and knowledge. And so
mm,
belief is like the sand. You
mm,
can find out that your belief has been misplaced and that you
mm.
were wrong, and that
Yeah.
washes away and your house crumbles.
Yeah.
But if you start with something really, really, really solid, something that you know,
It's
something
knowledge.
somebody
Yes.
can't take away from you,
Yes.
and build on that, you're better off.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that that is the problem that I see with religion,
Mm,
and why I wouldn't call myself a Christian or a Jew or a
mm,
Muslim is
mm,
that some of the things that these people believe
mm,
might not be wrong,
mm,
I don't know,
mm,
but they're not things that I know. And I
mm,
think that they oftentimes, as you're saying, there are things that cause such conflict that
mm,
they interfere with what we know. You know,
mm,
they interfere with our ability for you and I to get together and
mm,
say, there are these boys in the neighborhood that have no direction. Should we start a football team? You know,
mm, mm,
something like that.
mm,
But I don't do that because you're a Muslim and you pray at the wrong time of day,
mm.
and or whatever the case is, it's just, or you say
Mm,
Allah,
mm.
and every good American knows that God is not Allah. That's bullshit. Excuse
Okay.
me. I'm sorry for your viewers, but
Mm,
that becomes an attitude, and we can't, even if we say different things, God or Allah, or um, in Hebrew we say Adonai or Hashem,
mm,
and it we at the end of the day, these kids still need direction, and the widow down the
mm,
street still needs some help. And these are the kind of things that, regardless of these beliefs that we have, these are things that we know that we have to do. These are things that we know are required. And
that- absolutely. This is the thing. The same thing I'm trying to say is because people have their niches and their own secluded theological masters who teach them secluded beliefs, uh, at the same time condemning all other beliefs. That's when it becomes murkier and dirty and harmful to the society. I mean, I'm amazed the fact that America, being such a modern nation, its people don't even realize Allah is just the Arabic word for God. So uh,
Buddy, there are people in California that do
it's
not know that
amazing how
Oklahoma is a
it's
state in the union. They don't know America that Oklahoma is part of America. If you say Oklahoma, they say these are Californians for you. They don't know anything.
right. So it's what I'm saying is this can change if we change the way religion is taught in the society. That's why I'm saying a new generation need to learn about religion in a critical way in their schools. So this will change a lot of things. People will realize the differences between languages, cultures, traditions, how people relate, and how it is all the same as an American would think about God. It is the same way that other people would think about God, but with a different name, because obviously English is God is English, and
Let
in
me let
other
me offer you
languages there's
an
other words
extreme
for it.
opposition. I want to offer you
Mm,
an extreme opposition that
mm,
I don't see as extremely likely, but it is a possibility. With I've seen, this. It's a the Church of Satan in America is made up by these atheists who are really just challenging and rejecting. But let's suppose, for example, there were some parents who wanted to know why in the public schools are we not teaching the kids about Dionysus and the sex ritual and drunken orgies and things like this, and how you can, it's okay to have two or three or four or whatever of whatever gender, and you can, and then go home to your wife. Why aren't we teaching this in school? Now, I as a parent would have, I mean, at least up until later teenage years, I would have a problem with my kids even knowing about this kind of thing. So, uh, even, the Song of Solomon, if my kids could actually comprehend when they were like 7 or 8 or 10 or something, yeah, that's not even 12. I mean,
mm,
they've got to be older. So, in a
mm,
lot of what people consider religious, and people could come up with a new, there could be a new Joseph Smith next year who comes up with a new religion with something so bizarre that you don't
mm,
want your children exposed to this, forced exposed to this in public school. And I kind of think, I mean, the way that I've seen people do things in America, somebody would, just out of,
mm,
I guess, spite's not the right word, but that's the word I want to say, just out of pure nastiness, just throw something nasty in there and say, well, now everybody's got to do it, and everybody's got to be exposed to everything. I don't know if I,
Well,
again.
it's I don't buy much of that argument, to be honest with you.
Okay,
There's always this majority factor working, and there's this what is a majority opinion, like what is graduating to be a popular force, popular material. There, I mean, even if somebody comes up with this weird idea of teaching something, it has to go through the process in the society to become a popular opinion so that it can be inducted into the curriculum. So the
in
obvious
America,
pathways that
in
people would
America, it could
make
be
to
10
take.
people or 20 people, a church of 20 people, and they
Mm,
just in the whole nation, a church of 20
mm,
people, they would sue, get to the Supreme Court. It would be a big deal. You saw our cake maker who didn't want to make a homosexual cake for a wedding, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
mm.
People can do nutty things and get all the way to the Supreme Court. And I
At the
was
end
just,
of the day, Trey, we have choices. I mean, even the kids that are studying at school have choices. Like, you're not depriving them of their choices and their preferences, are you? No, you're
you
only
have the
giving
choice.
them a fair exposure. My proposition is to address the problems in religion because of how it is secluded, because of how the puritanical view of religion is being taught to kids, and condemnation of others is being taught to kids. My problem is with this. I've got a very specific problem, and I believe it's harmful. It's causing great harm to the societies. And if we can do something as a society in this regard to address this particular problem, it will be a great benefit to the future of nations. So, I mean, if you're okay to have your closing statement, and excuse me for today because the house is getting noisy, and we can catch up next week. So I would give you the opportunity to close today's talk with your final
It sounds like
statements.
it's just about dinner time over there in Australia, is it?
It's about lunchtime.
What? Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
Wow,
about
we're
lunchtime. Yeah,
way on the opposite side of the. Okay, I thought we were only like 6 hours off.
right.
Yeah, you know, so my initial interest, of course, was in talking about Abraham because I think that the story that I found in the Quran,
Yep, yep,
which is exposed in other traditions as well, it's just
yep.
such an interesting story, and it uh, Abraham in general, I think, has a potential to bring a lot of people together. They're going to
Hmm.
argue about the family story, but if they can get over that, there's something good to be had. Um,
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
I anyway, I think this is a good time. We need to talk about Jesus sometime. Let's do a
Sure.
Jesus.
Next,
Uh,
next, next, next week.
sure.
Okay. Do you want to talk about it particular parables, or do you want to have some topic in the mind, or how's it?
No, I mean, uh, come prepared to talk to me about the Quran and
Okay.
I've read the accounts in the Quran, but
Okay.
I'm not sure who wrote the Gospels or what their intention was, but I think there's some good material in there.
Okay. I mean, there's
So
heaps. I mean, I've been reading the Gospels. There's so much that Americans, I believe, are not reading into the Gospels, who are actually talking about textual criticism. They are not. If they read and made sense of those teachings in the Gospels, they wouldn't be disbelieving at all. That's my humble opinion. I can tell them why they shouldn't disbelieve, and I can tell them the truth in those parables of Christ. Yeah, we will talk about it. What do you think?
if I
Next
were
week at the same time?
also, if you have not had an opportunity to read it, if I were going to canonize a gospel that is not there, I would
Hmm.
put the Gospel of Thomas. Be ready to talk
Okay.
about that. Let's talk about the
Okay.
Gospel of Thomas too.
Okay. So
That's
next
good.
week, same time. Is that what it is? Same time next
Yeah,
week?
let's do
Yeah.
it at the
Okay.
same time next week.
Okay.
That's good for me.
Okay. Thank you for joining today, and thank you for all the viewers who watched us. So we'll see you in the next week. Until then, bye.
Have a good day. Bye.